Hey guys, welcome back to the real Mr.Beer. My name is Josh Ratliff. I'm the brewmaster here at Mr.Beer. I'm also the manager of our on-site homebrew store called Everything Homebrew, and I'm a BJCP certified beer judge. Today we're going to be doing Brut IPA, which I'm kind of excited about. I've been wanting to do this the past couple episodes, but I've had to postpone it because I've had to order the ingredients for it. I have not made one of these before. It's a brand new style, just coming out of the Bay Area. It's starting to gain a lot of traction, especially along the West Coast. There's a few breweries here in Arizona that just started making them. There's one here in Tucson. Dillinger Brewing Company was the first in Tucson to do their rendition of it. Really excellent beer. I think theirs could be a little drier, a little clearer, but anyway, let's get into what a Brut IPA is. So this is a brand new style that's kind of, think of it as a cross between like a really clear Pilsner, a very dry Saison but without any of the esters, and a kind of New England IPA in that it's going to be late hopped, so really hoppy but very little to no bitterness at all. So this is going to be a very effervescent, hoppy, low bitter, clear and crisp and very bone dry IPA. So it's going to be champagne-like, hence the name Brut IPA. It's going to have, one of the main points of this beer is to get your gravity basically down to 1.000, which is bone dry, is literally water dry. So there's not any sweetness whatsoever. So that means you're not going to be adding any kind of crystal malts or Carapils or Munich. Your grain bill is going to be very, very simple. This beer I'm doing today is actually the original recipe from, let me pull up the guy's name here. So Kim Sturdivant made this beer originally in San Francisco at Social Kitchen and Brewery. And I guess he was trying to do, something a little bit different with IPAs. He wanted to try to make one that's as dry as possible and very effervescent to allow the hop aromas to kind of pop out of the beer. Because when you have all that extra carbonation and effervescence, like just think about, when you pour that into a glass, all those crazy aromas you're going to get from that. I recently tried my first one when I went to Portland for the National Homebrew Conference. I had read about these. I figured this has got to be right up my alley because I love really dry Saisons and I love the really hoppy New England style IPAs. So when I got to Portland, one of the first things I did was seek out one of these beers in this style. The first one I had was a mango, so it wasn't really like a base style, but it's still really good. But everything that I did have, I tried many different versions of it, including a lot of homebrew renditions at the club night at the homebrew conference. And all of them were amazing, and I really love this beer, and I want this style, and I can't wait to see it kind of spread. Of course, there are those IPA purists who are still into the really bitter West Coast IPAs, and everything else is just crap to them. Those are true beer snobs, in my opinion. I say expand your palate. IPAs are one of the probably the most innovative beer style ever. Just because there are so many styles, like black ones, there's Belgian IPAs, there's even like red IPAs, the New England IPAs, session IPAs. So there's a lot of different subcategories for IPAs, much more than most other styles of beer. And IPAs are one of the most consumed beers on the planet right now, especially in the US. It's the most popular style to this day, with lagers behind that, and then sours are starting to creep up there. So this is based off of the original recipe that Kim Sturdivant made. Grain bill is going to be very, very simple. It's just 8 pounds of Pilsner malt. Again, this is a very light beer, light in color, effervescent, very light body. So you want to use a really light malt like Pilsner. So that means you're going to have to do an hour-long boil for this, and I'm going to be doing a 75-minute step mash because infusion mash, because the temperature of the mash water is going to be very low. The reason for this is so that the star of this recipe, the star ingredient, can work. This ingredient is an enzyme called amyloglucosidase, also known as glucoamylase enzyme. This enzyme has actually been used in brewing for a long time. It has the ability to break down complex sugars that might not otherwise ferment. Not just sugars, but starches, dextrins and such too, which is why you don't want to use carapils in this beer, because it's just going to break down all those dextrins that are there to create mouthfeel. Mouthfeel is not something you want with this beer. You're getting mouthfeel from the carbonation and not from the malt. So what this enzyme has been used for, and here's a little package of it. What this enzyme has been used for previously is for big imperial stouts, so they aren't super sweet on the palate. Because when you're brewing stouts, you usually brew them at a higher temperature, 160s, like 168 or so, if you want a really nice full rounded body. But brewing at higher temperatures also renders some of the sugars unfermentable. So using this in your imperial stout, a big imperial stout, will help bring down that gravity, your gravity point, so it's not too sweet or too rich on the palate. So what this is going to do is this is going to, typically if I didn't use this beer would probably finish at a gravity of about 1.012 or so. This is going to eat the rest of that last 0.012 points. It's going to eat all that down to 1.000. Hopefully that's the theory. So back to my notes here. Okay, so using this enzyme has kind of been a little bit of a matter of debate in the past few months, or the past year that this beer has kind of been out. Kim Sturdivant himself agrees that the best way to use it is in the mash. You want to shoot for a mash temperature of 143 to 146, and that's pretty low for a mash, and that's going to give you a light-bodied beer, but full attenuation because you didn't caramelize or cook any of those sugars, so they're going to be more available for the yeast. But the reason you want 143, 146, not just for that, but also because this denatures at 149, so it becomes completely useless and is basically dead, so to speak. So that's why you wouldn't use this in the boil, because it wouldn't work, and you don't want to use this at higher mash temperatures. You can, some people have used it in the fermentation, but I wouldn't really do that because people have been saying in like forums and such that I've been reading that they get better results if they do it in the mash, and the fermentation character and hop aromatics aren't affected by the enzyme during fermentation, because in fermentation the enzyme's still working all the time, and you kind of need to turn it off before you start doing your boil and your fermentation. And this could affect how your hops come out in the final product. So for that reason, and unfortunately for Mr.Beer users and extract users, this isn't really possible, as far as I know, to use this in an extract batch, because most of the malt extracts have things like carapils or crystal malts, which will prevent you from getting down to that completely bone dry gravity. With that said, I'm going to experiment. I got several packages of these when I ordered them online. I'm going to do a little bit of experimentation with our lightest malts like Pilsner malt, and see if I can get that gravity down by using this in fermentation or during some other period in the process. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is start getting my grains. So my grain bill, like I said, is very simple. We've got 8 pounds of malt, of Pilsner malt here, about a medium crush, and then we've got 1 pound of flaked rice and 1 pound of flaked corn. And I know what you're thinking, those are the ingredients in Budweiser. And they are. If you weren't using all these hops and doing this brewing technique, and you were using a lager yeast, you'd basically be making an American light lager, since those are the basic ingredients for that. But in this case, we're not making a lager, we're making an ale with a lot of hops in it. So I'm going to go ahead and just mix all this in. Hey Matt, can you hand me my paddle? And we're just going to go ahead and mix this up as well as we can. It'll mix up more when you stir it up in the mash tun. Okay. All right, now we're going to go ahead and grab our water. Okay. As usual, we're going to add a little bit of water and then a little bit of grain, a little bit of water, a little bit of grain, and stir it up. This is to prevent dough balls from forming, which can affect your efficiency. My mash water, again, you want to have it at about 145 or so. So this water is about 160. So by the time all the grains get in there, that heat exchange should be down to about 140s or so. I'll add a little bit of hot water or cold water to adjust if needed. But I am going to try to be really careful to stay within that active range for the glucoamylase enzyme. As with every mash, you want to stir it really well. Make sure you get all of those grains saturated and you're getting rid of any kind of dough balls that might form. Okay. Let's check our temperature. And we'll give that a minute to rise up. So the hops I'm using in this recipe, they call for mosaic, just strictly mosaic in the original recipe. I'm actually cutting that in half. I'm using half mosaic and half equinaut because I really like that combination. And I think it'll come out really well in this particular beer. Oh, another thing that's not in the original recipe, to the boil, I'm also adding a ½ pound of corn sugar, dextrose. This is just to boost the alcohol up to about 6.5% or so, but it'll also help further dry it out and help the yeast really kind of munch down on everything so that it gets down to that zero gravity, which is what I'm looking for. Another thing is when you're using glucoamylase enzyme, is that because it basically converts a lot of the starches and sugars into glucose, and pretty much the whole mash, the whole wort's going to be glucose, and that's going to be pretty nutrient deficient. So you may need to use a nutrients. I'm going to be doing this at pitching, and I'm also going to be adding it, or no, I'm adding some at the end of the boil, and I'm adding some during fermentation as well. At the beginning of fermentation, most likely, just to help give it some nutrients so that it helps to munch down on all those sugars, because it's going to need the nutrients for all those sugars to get down as dry as you want it to be. Let's see, a little bit more. Get that temperature adjust. I may need to add a little more hot water in there. As for the hops, I'm using cryo hops. I'm doing Mosaic and Equinox cryo hops. These are, it's a late hop addition, so the first hop addition in this is going to be 15 minutes before the boil ends. It's only going to be ½ ounce of cryo hops. This beer in total is only going to be about 25 IBUs, 20 IBUs. You can get a little bit lower, down to 12 if you want. But I want a little bit of balance. I don't want it to be come off as boring. So a little bit extra IBUs than what they recommend in the recipe, but still less than, like, say, a New England IPA, which those usually average around 30, 40 IBUs. So I'm going to be doing a half ounce in the boil, or 15 minutes at the end of the boil. You won't be able to see any of this stuff because I don't have time to do a whole all-grain recipe with you, obviously, but I can tell you about it, and maybe we'll do like a part 2, and I'll show you how to do this in a boil, especially whirlpool. So I'm going to be doing adding about 2½ ounces into the whirlpool, and this is basically as soon as you pour the wort into the your fermenter, or into, so what I like to do is I actually have it in my my kettle. As soon as it's done, I chill it down to 140. And then I take the chiller out, and then I stir it, and you want to keep a whirlpool, a vortex going, and you add the hops at that time, and you keep stirring it for about 20 minutes. So that 140 degrees is going to help extract very small amount of IBUs, not enough to really impact the beer, but it really helps to extract a lot of the oils and aromas and flavors into the beer. So whirlpool hop addition, something I don't think I've shown you on the show before, so I'll put that on my list for things to show for next time. The final hop addition is going to be close to 7 ounces of hops, which is going to be about 3 ounces of cryo hops. So that's a lot of hops, but it's all going to be dry hopped, 5-day dry hop. With cryo hops, you can even do a little bit longer if you want, without worrying about it getting too grassy. If you're using regular hops, don't do any longer than 5 days for your dry hop. Once you've dry hopped it, be sure you transfer it or remove the hop somehow, or bottle it or keg it after those 5 days are up. Okay, let's check our temperature again. 145, that is perfect. I was kind of worried I wasn't going to have it on point there. Go ahead and close this, and this is going to sit for 75 minutes, about 15 minutes longer than normal. Then I'm going to add, with what little space I have left, of course that should go down a little bit as the grains absorb the water, but with the little space I have left, I'm going to add a little bit of hot water, boiling hot water, to adjust the temperature up to about 168. Let that sit for about 10 minutes. That's going to be my mash out temperature, and that helps stop the enzyme, and it helps flush all the sugars out when you start doing your sparge. And I'll be doing a batch sparge in 2 steps, just, you know, with a pitcher of hot water, and that water's going to be about 168 degrees. If you want this recipe, I would just Google Brut IPA recipe, and it's literally the first one that pops up. I think, let me double check that. Yeah, it's literally the very first one that pops up. The Social Kitchen and Brewery Brut IPA recipe. You can tweak it if you want, like I did. Like I said, I added a little bit of dextrose to this to kind of lighten it up and give a little bit more alcohol without adding any body, and that'll also help dry it out a bit too. Let me see what commercial examples there are right now. There aren't many, but I wonder if any large breweries.
I think Drake's is really similar.
Drake's?
Yeah. One of the fairly large. They already did.
Yeah. Okay, Beer and Wine Journal, they usually have good examples. Yeah, there really aren't a lot. Like, I don't know how popular this is in the East Coast or Midwest. I know that it's, like I said, it started in California, so it's been getting really gaining a lot of traction all up and down the West Coast. And it's starting to bleed into, you know, here into the Southwest and further east. So I'm sure you'll start seeing commercial examples on your shelves soon. They are few and far between right now, especially here. There's only a couple Tucson breweries that do them, but there are a few Arizona breweries that have started doing it. I think one Tucson brewery just is releasing another one. Who is that, Matt? Do you know? Was it?
Public.
I think it was Public.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, Public
I know
Brewhouse.
Easy Wilderness and not Wren House.
No, I think
Goldwater.
Wren House has one too.
And Goldwater's gone.
Yeah, Goldwater, AZ Wilderness, Dillinger Brewing Company,
Yeah.
and yeah, they're starting to gain a lot of traction. Just want to check, make sure my temperature is still good and it's not cooling too fast or going too high. Yeah, we're perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add this glucoamylase enzyme now. Now that I know we're at temperature. One thing you can do instead of adding boiling water to this, if your mash tun is a pot, usually some people use a pot with it's like a jacketed pot or kettle. You can actually just bring heat and bring the whole mash heat up. That's a step mash, and that's a lot easier in pots than it is in these cooler kettles. Usually you got to add water and adjust that way, which is a little more difficult. But these cooler kettles maintain your temperatures a lot better than a pot does, especially if the pot's not jacketed. All right, and they say one of these is good for a whole 5-gallon batch, so I'm just going to go ahead and add the whole package. Yeah, the recipe that we shared, they use a liquid enzyme. I think it's 0.65 milliliters or something like that, 65 milliliters. But I couldn't get the liquid, so I got the powder, and they said that one package should do it, so we'll see. And I'll definitely, once this beer is done, I'll report back with a tasting video. Maybe even do an update during fermentation when it's time to dry hop. And make sure all of that's broken up, and then go ahead and stir it into the mash. Try not to splash too much because this is going to cool your wort off too fast, or your mash. Just kind of stir from the bottom up. All right. Now we'll let this sit for 75 minutes. And then when it's done, I'm going to go ahead and sparge, Vorloff, do all the clarification and put it into the kettle, start my boil. Again, this could be a 90-minute boil. I'm also adding some whirl flock to this. You can also use Irish moss. Typically, you add it in the last 10-15 minutes of the boil. I'm going to be adding this with my first hop addition at the 15-minute mark of the boil. Whirl flock's basically the same as Irish moss. It's just really concentrated carrageenan. Carrageenan is the active ingredient in Irish moss that helps clarify your beer. It's basically an it's a coagulant. So the positive ions of the carrageenan bring together all of these proteins and fats and drop them down to the bottom. It looks like someone's rating us. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Welcome, guys. We're making some beer. So yeah, Irish moss is actually a type of seaweed, in case you didn't know that. And a lot of breweries use it to help clarify their beer, especially in pale ales, pilsners, things like that. So, welcome guys. Thanks for the raid, guys. We really appreciate it. All right, so we got our amylase enzyme in there. I'm going to go ahead and pop the top back on. Open my thermometer in there, make sure my temperature is going to stay consistent. All right, and so next time I'll show you guys, I'll keep you up to date on this recipe. We'll do an update during dry hopping period, and then I'll also do an update when we keg it and we do tasting notes. I want to see if I got the clarity I want. I want this to be really, really clear. Some of the commercial examples I've had haven't really hit that mark. But since this isn't really an official style yet, there aren't really any set guidelines for clarity for this style of beer. But being a brut IPA, you would think it should be crystal clear like a champagne and very effervescent and sparkling. So that's what I'm shooting for. Oh, and by the way, the yeast I'm using for this, which I almost completely forgot to talk about, it's from Imperial Yeast. It's called Corporate. This is a seasonal yeast. It's only available till the end of this month. Rumor has it, when I was talking to the rep at the National Homebrew Conference in Portland this year, a former employee of one of the big macro breweries, I guess, isolated some of their proprietary yeast and created this, so that's why it's called Corporate, which I think is kind of funny. But this is becoming really popular for these types of brut IPAs because they're highly attenuative, so they'll help chew up all of those sugars. It is kind of medium flocculation, but if you give it some some Irish moss, it should fall out really well and become a very clear beer. And it's also pretty forgiving on your temperatures, but you really do want to stay on the low end of the temperature scale. I'm going to be brewing about 65, 66 degrees. All right, and I think that's about it. And don't forget, give your beer nutrient. If you're making this, you're going to need nutrient for it, because again, with that glucoamylase enzyme, it's going to be mostly glucose in your wort, and your yeast are going to need a lot of nutrients to help break that down. All right, and thanks again for Clem Can Cook for the raid. Really appreciate it. You guys go and subscribe. We'll let you know when we have shows. We do this twice a week on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, same time. That's 2:30 Arizona time. We have weird times, so we don't do daylight savings, so you might want to just check the conversions on where you're at. Also, if you scroll down underneath the video, we have our community forums. You can always ask questions there, meet our community members. You can also go on our website and live chat with me, or give me a call, or send me an email if you have any type of brewing questions, or even Mr.Beer customer service questions. Appreciate you guys for joining us, and we will see you next week. Cheers.